In this episode of True Crime Threads, we explore the shocking murder of the Taylor family by their own twin daughters, driven by a forbidden love. In the quiet, tree-lined streets of Lakewood, the Taylor family appeared to have achieved an ideal life that most could only dream of. Jonathan and Aunt Evelyn Taylor were a power couple. He was a renowned architect, and she a respected attorney. Together, they built a life of privilege and refinement, with a spacious home, luxury cars, and all the trappings of success. They were admired, not only for their accomplishments but for the family they had nurtured. The Taylors had two daughters, identical twins Julia and Mia, who seemed to share the same brilliance and beauty as their parents. The twins were well known at school and in the community for their charm, academic excellence, and flawless public image. To outsiders, the Taylor twins were the embodiment of their parents' hard work, the pinnacle of what a good family could produce. From a young age, Julia and Mia's bond had been notably intense. As young children, they were inseparable, spending hours together, understanding each other in a way that often left others feeling like outsiders. They developed a unique connection that allowed them to finish each other's sentences, anticipate each other's moods, and share interests so profoundly that it was difficult to tell where one twin ended and the other began. Their relationship was the sort that inspired admiration, fascination, and, at times, envy. Teachers, friends, and even family members marveled at their closeness, seeing it as a special sisterly connection. Yet beneath the surface, their bond was more complex than anyone realized. With every expectation, Jonathan and Evelyn placed a heavy weight on their daughter's shoulders. Both twins felt the pressure to meet the high standards set by their parents, who valued achievement, conformity, and the appearance of propriety above all else. As the girls grew into young adulthood, they began to feel trapped within the confines of this perfect family image, burdened by their parents' need for control and approval. Julia and Mia's only real escape from this weight was each other, finding in their bond a refuge from their parents' demands. But as time passed, that bond transformed into something beyond sisterly closeness, a secret they knew would destroy their family's pristine reputation if it ever came to light. What they once viewed as a sanctuary slowly became a forbidden attraction, and with it, the seeds of desperation and disaster took root. As Julia and Mia grew older, their bond deepened in ways they didn't fully understand and couldn't talk about. What had started as an inseparable friendship began to evolve into something that made them feel isolated from everyone around them. This connection felt sacred, but they knew it was something that would be condemned by everyone they knew, especially their parents. The fear of discovery gnawed at them constantly, but it was also what made their connection feel even more intense, even addictive. Alone in their rooms, or when sneaking out to hidden places, Julia and Mia clung to each other, feeling like they were the only ones who truly understood each other's thoughts, fears, and desires. They began living in a secret world, sharing everything but constantly haunted by the fear of exposure. The sisters' behavior became more erratic, raising concerns from those closest to them. Jonathan and Evelyn, accustomed to their daughter's closeness, started noticing subtle changes. Julia and Mia were becoming increasingly isolated, withdrawing from friends and avoiding family gatherings. Their intense attachment raised eyebrows among their peers, who found it odd that the twins seemed to have no interest in dating or making separate friends. The sisters, so used to presenting themselves perfectly, began to falter. They were paranoid, constantly watching each other's every move, afraid that a misplaced word or glance would betray them. Small fights and accusations began to erupt as their shared guilt and fear made them tense and unpredictable. As their private relationship deepened, so did their anxiety about the possible repercussions. They knew their parents would never accept them if they found out their family's reputation was built on respectability and strict adherence to societal norms. Evelyn, especially, was obsessed with status and image and would never forgive them for disrupting the family's perfect facade. To Julia and Mia, their parents had become a threat, obstacles to the life they secretly envisioned for themselves. They felt trapped, forced to choose between hiding their truth forever or facing a lifetime of judgment and rejection. This looming fear only strengthened their desperate resolve. They saw no way out that didn't involve removing the threat altogether. Julia and Mia convinced themselves that their love couldn't survive with their parents in the picture, and that to truly be together, they had to do the unthinkable. Their thoughts began to spiral, fixating on a drastic solution that would allow them to break free from the lives they felt trapped in. The plan took root in whispers and stolen glances, with Julia and Mia carefully, obsessively outlining each detail. If they were going to rid themselves of the threat, they couldn't afford a single mistake. They'd need to make it look like a random attack, a horrific home invasion that would leave no one suspecting them. It was a sinister and almost surreal idea, yet the twins felt a grim sense of relief at having a plan that could finally bring them freedom. They spent weeks observing their parents' routines, tracking their movements, and memorizing the layout of the house, even though they knew it by heart. Every night, after they were sure their parents were asleep, Julia and Mia would sneak out of their rooms to practice moving in silence, rehearsing the grim task that lay ahead. They scoured the internet for tips on staging break-ins and hiding evidence, consumed by the dark world they were entering. To avoid suspicion, the twins kept up appearances at school and around town. They acted like the loving daughters everyone expected, attending family events and gatherings with fake smiles and perfect composure. Beneath the surface, though, they were calculating every move, growing colder and more focused on the mission that they believed would free them. They picked a night when they knew their parents would be home alone and made sure to plan an alibi, crafting a story they could recite by heart if questioned. They would claim they had been out studying together, and they made sure to be seen around town earlier in the day to solidify their cover. As the night of their plan approached, the twins gathered supplies: a pair of gloves, masks, and a crowbar to stage a forced entry. They packed everything in a small bag, hiding it carefully in their closet. The tension between them was palpable. The once close sisters now exchanged tense, wary glances, each afraid the other might back out at the last moment. But they also felt united, bound by a shared fear and a twisted determination. When the night finally arrived, they moved through their darkened house with silent precision. In the shadows, the sisters crept toward their parents' bedroom, feeling a strange mix of horror and exhilaration. Every creak of the floor and every brush of fabric against the walls felt magnified in the silence, as if the house itself knew the horror about to unfold. Each step brought them closer to the end of one life and the beginning of another. The weight of what they were about to do pressed on them, but they pushed it down, reminding themselves that this was the only way to be together. As they entered the room, they became the executioners of their own family, convinced that this dark act would bring them the freedom they so desperately craved. The following morning, the quiet streets of Lakewood were shattered by news of a horrific tragedy. Jonathan and Evelyn Taylor had been brutally murdered in their own home, and the scene left neighbors and friends in a state of shock. The Taylor twins, Julia and Mia, were discovered in a state of supposed grief and disbelief, weeping as they spoke to the police and media. To the community, they appeared to be victims, the surviving daughters of a once idyllic family. The story quickly spread, with media outlets painting a picture of two young women robbed of their parents in a senseless act of violence. Lakewood had always felt safe, but now fear and suspicion hung heavy in the air. Who could have done such a thing? From the start, the police suspected a home invasion. The signs of forced entry pointed to an outside attacker, and the brutality of the crime seemed inconsistent with anything the small town had ever seen. However, as detectives began combing through the scene, they noted subtle details that didn't quite add up. The signs of a struggle looked almost staged, and while the break-in seemed convincing at first glance, it felt strangely deliberate, almost too meticulous. Still, without clear evidence, the police treated Julia and Mia as innocent survivors, devastated by the loss of their parents. But soon, cracks in the twins' carefully rehearsed story began to emerge. Their alibi, which had initially seemed solid, was inconsistent upon closer inspection. Witnesses who had seen them the day before reported noticing odd behavior. The twins had appeared nervous, distracted, and far from their usual composed selves. When interviewed separately, Julia and Mia's stories didn't fully align. Detectives noticed that they avoided certain questions, giving vague answers when asked about their relationship with their parents. As the investigation deepened, a series of cryptic posts on Julia's social media account attracted police attention. She had written about feeling trapped, misunderstood, and pressured to conform. These posts, once seen as typical teenage angst, now seemed darker, almost like veiled hints of what was to come. Friends and classmates came forward, recounting instances of the twins' obsessive closeness, with some mentioning the sisters' increasingly isolated behavior in recent months. Rumors began to swirl, whispers about a possible secret relationship that had driven the twins to pull away from everyone else. With growing suspicion, the detectives revisited the evidence. It was then that a chilling discovery unraveled everything. Hidden in Julia's room beneath a loose floorboard was a journal. The pages were filled with confessions, descriptions of her relationship with Mia, and detailed entries about their plan to kill their parents. The revelation hit the community like a storm, shattering any illusions of innocence and exposing the twisted reality beneath the twins' carefully curated facade. The police now had their answers, and the twins' dark secret was about to be exposed to the world. As the police investigation reached its climax, the revelations surrounding the Taylor family murders sent shockwaves through Lakewood and beyond. With the journal in hand, detectives confronted Julia and Mia, laying bare the evidence that had shattered their carefully constructed facade. The twins, who had once portrayed themselves as grieving daughters, now stood accused of a crime so heinous that it left the community reeling. The idea that the perfect family could fall victim to such a monstrous betrayal turned neighbors against each other, and trust evaporated in the wake of the tragedy. Facing mounting evidence, the sisters finally confessed, their voices trembling as they recounted the dark path they had traveled. They spoke of the pressure their parents had put on them, the suffocating expectations that had driven them into each other's arms. What had begun as innocent love had morphed into a desperate need to escape a life they felt was no longer theirs. Their admissions revealed not just the premeditated nature of the crime but the psychological toll of their hidden relationship. The twins had convinced themselves that murdering their parents was the only way to live freely together, the only means to ensure they could be truly united without the shadow of judgment looming over them. The story captivated the nation, drawing attention not only for the shocking nature of the crime but for the complexity of the sisters' motivations. People debated the influence of family expectations, societal norms, and the tangled web of forbidden love that had spiraled into violence. Psychologists and criminologists weighed in, analyzing the twins' behavior and offering insights into the fragile minds of young individuals struggling with identity and acceptance. Julia and Mia became symbols of both tragic love and monstrous betrayal, embodying the consequences of repression and societal pressure taken to the extreme. As the trial approached, the media frenzy intensified. Headlines splashed the sisters' faces across newspapers and television screens, further entrenching their story in public consciousness. Friends and neighbors grappled with their feelings of betrayal, struggling to reconcile the loving twins they had known with the ruthless killers they had become. Courtroom proceedings unfolded in a spectacle that captivated millions, drawing audiences who were both horrified and fascinated by the grim tale. Ultimately, Julia and Mia were sentenced to life in prison, their lives forever changed by the irreversible decisions they had made. The community was left to grapple with the fallout of the tragedy, mourning not just the loss of the Taylors but the innocence of a neighborhood that had once felt so secure. The twins had sought to escape the chains of their upbringing, but in their desperate act, they had forged new ones, locking themselves away from the world in a prison of their own making. As their story faded from the headlines, the haunting question lingered: could love really justify such horrific acts? And what does it mean to truly escape when the chains are of your own design?